There is one player in the NFL draft who can impact how the Bengals navigate throughout the entire weekend, and in this video, I'll explain the conflict Cincinnati would have to tackle before drafting him. Hi again, Bengals fans. John Sheeran of A to Z Sports Cincinnati here, and just like a lot of you, my mind is full of the various iterations of how this NFL draft can unfold for the Bengals. And it all starts with the first round pick, obviously, but I think when that time comes, we'll have a pretty good idea about who the Bengals are targeting, and we can narrow down that candidate list to maybe like 5 or 6 players. With this team specifically, drafts are made or broken with how day 2 unfolds. And it's obviously impossible to predict which players are going to be there for the Bengals to draft in both the second and third round, but a lot of their questionable decisions over the past handful of years, specifically in the Zach Taylor era, they have come in those 2 rounds. Honestly, you can go year by year from 2019 to now, looking through all those draft classes, focusing on the second and third round picks, and you can determine if that draft class was worthwhile at all. You're talking about Drew Sample as a second round pick in 2019. T. Higgins and Logan Wilson obviously were bangers in 2020 in both the second and third round respectively. In 2021, you had Jackson Carman, a gigantic whiff in the second round, followed by Joseph Asai, which is, kind of up in the air considering he's still here. 2022 rolls around and second round pick Cam Taylor-Britt has been an absolute roller coaster for the team, while third round pick Zach Carter was a complete bust. 2023 I think was a notably better class, and that had a second round pick in DJ Turner and a third round pick in Jordan Battle, who I think have both been good when they have played. And then 2024 is kind of a mystery, but it doesn't look too good right now with your 2 third-round picks being Jermaine Burton and McKinley Jackson, and Chris Jenkins is a decent second-rounder. There is a strong and healthy amount of variance there, with really only Higgins and Wilson being the truly good picks, with most of them being kind of underwhelming. And when looking at this year's draft, just like many of those that I just went over, I think the second round is once again going to be a very critical point that can determine how the rest of the draft goes. And the availability of one player specifically, I think, can change the entire dynamic of how this draft goes for the Bengals. And that is Notre Dame safety Xavier Watts. Because I'm going to keep it real with you guys. If the Bengals pass on a safety in the first round, they don't draft a Malachi Starks or a Nick Eamon in the first round, right? They address either defensive tackle, defensive end, guard, whatever the case may be, right? And Xavier Watts is staring Al Golden in the face in the second round, and he has the chance to take him. I can't imagine the type of strong case he's going to make to the rest of the war room to make that pick happen. Because I know this for a fact. Even when Geno Stone is playing at his best, tackling is not necessarily his strong suit, and is definitely well below what Al Golden wants out of his safeties. And if he sees the guy who's ran his defense for the last 2 years and has been a captain under his leadership, he's just there to be drafted in the second round to replace Geno Stone, I just can't see Golden sitting on his hands and just allowing that not to happen. And I bring up the second round for Watts because it really does seem like that's the highest he could probably go in this draft. There are reports that he's even graded as low as a 4th rounder to some teams. So his variance in terms of draft position is all over the place, but I think again, the second round is where the Bengals would have to take him. But that's where potential conflict can come into play because in all likelihood, I'm not expecting the Bengals to draft an offensive lineman with their first round pick. I think it's interesting that they met with Josh Simmons, who could theoretically move inside the guard and then outside the tackle in a couple years' time, but outside of that, I think that for the most part, they're looking at day 2 as to where they're going to address the offensive line. So when the Bengals are on the clock in the second round and it's down to either Watts or an offensive lineman with that pick, I think the majority of voices, specifically the most important voices, are going to be banging the table for the offensive lineman. But Golden himself might be the most important addition the Bengals made this entire offseason. His ability to turn this defense around and get it competitive again, it may determine whether or not the Bengals make the playoffs. And if he believes with his entire heart that he needs his safety from Notre Dame to make this whole thing work, that may be a concession that they allow to happen. And the ripple effect of that pick would be massive. Obviously, Stone's days in Cincinnati would be numbered, but more importantly, they would enter the third round and beyond without having to address the offensive line. And judging by how the Bengals have drafted in recent years, when they have a need that hasn't been addressed in the first 2 rounds, that very much opens the door for a massive reach to be taken in rounds 3 or 4. The Bengals do need to address the offensive line, but wasting resources at the position for a pick that's not worth it, that solves no problems. And of course, it's not a guarantee that that hypothetical pick would be a reach. He could be a very good player, worth a 3rd or 4th round pick. He could be ready to start immediately. But again, I would be a fool to just ignore recent history here. So it's fitting that you have to pronounce the X in Xavier Watts' name because I really do think he could be the X factor for this entire draft class for the Bengals. But what do you guys think? Would you want the Bengals to draft Xavier Watts in the second round if it meant that you had to wait until the 3rd or 4th round to draft an offensive lineman? Let me know in the comments below.